Nobody expected big sloppy mess Dricus du Plessis to put away Robert Whittaker. Then they doubted that he had what it takes to defeat Sean Strickland. After that, they thought his bizarre style wouldn't fare well against a technical kickboxer like Israel Adesanya. Now he's the reigning defending middleweight champ, and everybody was wrong about all of that. And so inspired by his recent title defense, I want to look at 10 fighters that nobody expected to reach the top. When they did, everybody assumed it was a weird one-off, and then went on to prove everybody wrong. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point. A massive thank you to our channel Hall of Famers for all of their continued support, and these are 10 fighters who were unexpectedly great after fluke wins. Number 10, Emanuel Newton. It's so incredibly important for you to understand where King Mo was in his career when he was originally defeated by Emanuel Newton. Lawal had defeated Gegard Mousasi to become the undefeated Strikeforce light heavyweight champion, immediately shooting him to best guy at 205 outside the UFC. Following the loss of that title, Mo rebounded with wins over Roger Gracie and Lorenz Larkin, a victory that would be overturned due to a PED fail, and the entire incident would end up torpedoing his obvious move to the UFC as a future title contender, prompting a move to Bellator, where Lawal was expected to burn through everybody. In the semifinal of the Season 8 tournament, Mo, who had won his debut in less than 4 minutes, was set to take on a plus 700 underdog in Emanuel Newton, who nearly 30 fights into his career without any major titles was seen as a career journeyman. Any way he won would have likely been considered a fluke, but a spinning back fist KO out of nowhere did Newton no favors in beating the fluke allegations. But Emanuel would go on to win the tournament, then defeat Mo in the rematch definitively, 4 rounds out of 5. He unified the light heavyweight title and then successfully defended it twice, a feat that only Vadim Nemkov was able to surpass with his run with the title. About as unexpected as greatness gets. The only reason he's not higher on the list is because it's Bellator. Number 9, Forrest Griffin. A huge part of the appeal of Forrest Griffin was that, despite being 6'3" and shredded walking around at 220, he was just like you and me. He was the everyman who won this reality show, and we were all rooting for him to do decently well. And he did. He got a few solid first round stops after TUF. He almost won a split decision in a classic with Tito Ortiz. He was doing as well as anybody could hope. You have to remember, TUF wasn't yet established as this champion producing machine yet, and his first round loss to Keith Jardine didn't exactly give fans title hopes for Griffin either. When he was paired with the debuting Shogun Rua coming from Pride, the light heavyweight largely considered the best in the world outside the UFC at the time, I know I did not have high expectations for Forrest's performance, and that seemed to be the general sentiment. But we were all wrong. Griffin would wear Rua down and get an all-time classic submission victory. Even with the win though, fans were still skeptical that he could defeat current champion Rampage Jackson, who had just destroyed Chuck Liddell to take the title and then unified it with Pride's champion Dan Henderson. It was like, okay, you had an amazing moment, Griffin, but now reality is going to set in. It didn't. It did not set in. Forrest beat him too in what would earn Fight of the Year honors, a world title for Griffin, and a place as an Elite 205 fighter legitimately all time after that. Number 8, Mike Brown. If you knew anything about the WEC as an MMA fan in 2008, it was that Uriah Faber was the fucking man. 21-1 in his career, 17 finishes on a 13-fight win streak, the reigning 5-time defending at featherweight with wins over Dominic Cruz, Jeff Curran, and Jens Pulver. The guy was headed to superstardom, and this was his absolute peak in the WEC. Enter Mike Brown. While he did beat former title contender Jeff Curran in his promotional debut and had a solid record with solid wins on the regional scene, because of the status of Faber, Brown was largely dismissed and a massive underdog going into the fight. It didn't help that Uriah would essentially sprint right into the punch that Mike finished him with for a stunning upset in the first round. Presumed in the moment to be a fluke bad judgment by the California Kid, sentiment changed after Brown successfully defended against Leonard Garcia via first round arm triangle. When the rematch with Faber came less than a year and a half after they first met, the odds were now just about even, and the bout popped a massive rating of 1.5 million viewers. Mike would leave no doubt this time though, getting a definitive 5-round decision victory over the greatest featherweight in WEC history up to that point. Brown would drop the strap to the eventual GOAT Jose Aldo, but had already sealed his place as the elite 145er all time. Number 7, Frankie Edgar. I remember so distinctly not realizing that UFC 112 was in Abu Dhabi, and that the event actually started at 1 p.m. EST, so I fully expected to watch the card at 10 p.m. as normal, which I did as they aired the replay at that time, knowing that a lot of fans wouldn't have realized the show started earlier. But that afternoon, sitting with my brother watching SportsCenter, we were both in shock and heartbroken when the ticker revealed that Frankie Edgar beat BJ Penn for the lightweight title. I barely even knew who Frankie Edgar was. What the fuck was this? He beat the Prodigy? No, couldn't be. Somebody flipped the names on the ticker. The decision was a UD, but it was an incredibly close close fight, with the vast majority of media and fans believing Penn deserved the judge's nod. I think the shock that Prime BJ was just beat by a pretty unfamiliar contender did not sit right with fans, and so an immediate rematch was set up to right the wrong that had been done to all of us. Except this time Edgar would win all 5 rounds very clearly. Well shit, I guess we were all wrong about that dude. Frankie would go on to show us all how wrong we were with his epic rivalries against Gray Maynard and Benson Henderson, as well as 2 subsequent featherweight title challenges over the years, proving to us that the answer to the question who is an all-time great lightweight that nobody expected to be is Frankie Edgar. Number 6, Leon Edwards. Despite going on a run of 10 fights without a single loss and deserving a title fight for probably a full year or more before he got it, Leon Edwards could not buy the faith of the fans if he had Jeff Bezos' money. Even the Nate Diaz fight, a bout that he won soundly, the only thing anybody talked about afterwards was, wow, he almost knocked you out at the end of that fight. So going into his matchup with a guy who was working his way into the welterweight GOAT argument, Kamaru Usman, pretty much everybody was expecting the champ to do his thing, despite Edwards regularly showing how great he was in the lead-up. But everybody's assumptions seemed to be validated all the way up to the last minute of the 5th, where it looked like Rocky was just completely outclassed. Then of course, headshot dead, and we got a new champion. But many were still quick to dismiss it as a fluke of a head kick. You landed one good shot and got dominated for nearly 25 minutes. It was an incredible moment, but there's no way you're winning the rematch. I know I fully expected him to lose the second time around, but that was not what we got at all. Instead, Leon would leave no doubt that in their second encounter, he was the better fighter, and go on to have a second successful title defense against Colby Covington, making him look worse than he ever has. Whether that was because of Leon or Colby having a bad night, Edwards still went out there and proved that he was overlooked for way too long and champion caliber all the way through. He was then overthrown by another overlooked guy, but it's too early to put him on this list. Number 5, TJ Dillashaw. In the long absence of Dominic Cruz, Renan Barão's legacy as interim champion looked a lot different than your typical fighter in that position, with 34 career victories in a row going back nearly a decade, and with wins over Uriah Faber twice, Michael McDonald and Eddie Wineland, Barão was the man, and would eventually be upgraded to undisputed during his reign. So going into his fight with TJ Dillashaw, it wasn't particularly notable. He lost the tough finale and had recently lost to Rafael Assunção, but otherwise was doing okay, I guess. Nobody was giving TJ a chance. Barão was a 10-1 favorite. Dillashaw would wreck the unbeatable Brazilian monster champ for 5 whole rounds and cap the performance off with a head kick finish. The result was so shocking that some tried to justify it by saying that Barão simply never recovered from the first round knockdown. When you beat somebody up that bad and they still schedule an immediate rematch, it really goes to show just how unexpected it all was, and how dominant Renan had been before that fight. But of course, TJ would win that rematch, end up with 3 bantamweight title defenses over his 2 reigns, and is generally considered one of the greatest ever at 135, unless you disqualify him for being the CEO of EPO. Speaking of all-time bantamweights though, number 4, Aljamain Sterling. Despite one hell of a run-up to his bantamweight title challenge against Petr Yan, including an impressive first-round submission victory over Corey Sandhagen, late in the 4th round, it was pretty clear that Aljamain Sterling was going to need a finish and probably couldn't get it if he wanted to be champion. Yan was well on his way to securing the last round he needed when he would knee Aljo on the ground and be the first ever champion to lose the title via disqualification. Fans dogpiled on Sterling over the perception that he was milking the illegal knee that ended the fight, and given how that first bout went, the expectation was that next time no referee will be saving Aljo. But everybody was wrong. Was the rematch close? Absolutely, but you cannot argue that Sterling didn't look massively improved and earned that split decision victory. And if that wasn't enough to quiet the critics of his DQ title win, surely beating TJ Dillashaw and Henry Cejudo would, right? Sadly, no. Since TJ was hurt and Cejudo was off for 3 years, some detractors, who probably didn't like Aljo anyway, dismissed a lot of what he did. But with 3 straight title defenses, the most ever at bantamweight in the UFC, history will be more kind to Sterling than some of the fandom has been. Number 3, Fabricio Werdum. Because of the relative scope of the MMA fandom at the time, and the fact that Fedor Emelianenko's mythic heavyweight run was still ongoing, the idea that Fabricio Werdum would beat him was laughable. Fabricio Werdum? The guy that got KO'd by Junior Dos Santos and cut from the UFC? Yeah, sure. The fact that Werdum was so poorly regarded is part of what made his win against Emelianenko something Dana White simply could not contain his glee over.
He's not one of the best in the world. It's over. I've been saying it for a long time. You know, all that was back in 2005. It's not 2005 anymore. Guy's been inactive, hasn't fought anybody good. It is what it is.
So not only was there that perception, but it also just felt like Fedor got caught. Lucky Fabricio. He'll probably go back to relative obscurity after this. A trivia question about who was the guy that broke Fedor's streak. Nope, after a slight setback losing to Uberim, Werdum would return to the UFC, rattle off 5 straight, and then dethrone heavyweight king Cain Velasquez. With that win and the breaking of Fedor's streak, Fabricio is widely considered an all-time great. Not too bad for a guy the UFC cut. Number 2, Stipe Miocic. Hey look, it's the guy that took the belt from Cavallo. If you go back and watch Stipe Miocic's own reaction to winning the heavyweight championship against Fabricio Werdum, it's like he himself didn't believe that he was going to do it. And the fans certainly did not either. For one reason or another, Stipe has essentially been a perpetual underdog his entire career. It's like nobody ever expects him to do well, and particularly on that night. As I mentioned, Werdum had just dethroned heavyweight king Cain Velasquez, and he was looking mighty goatish as he burned through every top heavyweight on his way to that belt. So nobody expected him to win, and then there was the nature of the victory, with Werdum very early in the fight charging towards Miocic only to get blasted on his way in. All of this lent to the idea that Stipe wasn't really the guy, and that Fabricio had just made a huge mistake. Well, that notion would get entirely squashed. Despite during his reign most of the time being the underdog, Miocic would go on to defend that heavyweight title more than anybody else in UFC history, an accomplishment absolutely nobody expected from Ohio's finest. Even now, as he waits to fight John Jones in November, the sentiment is that he has no chance in hell. Here's hoping that Stipe has one more in him, because man, what a fitting end to a story for a guy who was perpetually counted out. Number 1, Amanda Nunes. I mean, how could it not be Amanda Nunes? At least when you think about it, because as hard as it is to imagine now, most everybody was thinking that Nunes getting a title opportunity against Miesha Tate was really a formality more than anything. After Tate took the bantamweight title from Holly Holm in dramatic fashion, the UFC immediately let it be known that Ronda Rousey was her first defense to complete their trilogy, but Ronda wasn't ready to come back, and so the UFC decided to make a filler fight essentially, one that would end up headlining UFC 200 after the card was hit with a nuke. It was a fight nobody was that excited for, and nobody expected Nunes to win. 2 years earlier, she had been decimated by Kat Zingano, and people hadn't forgot it. The shock at her dominance over Tate led to the UFC themselves almost entirely dismissing Nunes, the now champion, in the lead up to her first defense against Rousey, with all the marketing focusing solely on the fact that Ronda was coming back. After she murked Rousey in 48 seconds, a bit more respect was put on her name, and it would only grow as she beat literally every other all-time great female fighter ever on her way to GOAT status. But I will tell you someone that Amanda Nunes has not defeated, and that is the editor of this video, Luke Taylor. He does an incredible job on these edits. Please show him all the love on his socials, and go check out his awesome YouTube channel. A big thank you to our channel Hall of Famers. You guys are truly the glue that keeps this channel together. Thank you kindly. And fight fans, if you hit the join button, you can become a channel member as well. There's exclusive content, we live stream writers meetings, like and subscribe to dodge a weird headbutt to the hip by Drickus Duplessis, leave a comment down below about whether you were a true believer of the fighters on today's video or not, and thank you so much for watching. Ivan Netniaj.